At some point on your spiritual journey, you probably felt this deep sense of isolation. Friends don't quite understand you anymore, your old habits don't fit, and even though you're growing, it feels like no one is walking beside you. That loneliness isn't random, it's a part of the process. In this video, I'll break down why the spiritual path feels so lonely sometimes, what it really means, and most importantly, how you can navigate it without losing your sense of peace or connection. Here's something most spiritual teachers won't tell you. Spiritual awakening literally rewires your brain's reward systems. When you start growing spiritually, your dopamine pathways, the neural circuits that determine what feels meaningful and satisfying to you, begin to reorganize themselves. This isn't just philosophy, it's neuroscience. What used to give you that hit of satisfaction, achieving goals, external validation, material successes, suddenly feel hollow. Meanwhile, experiences that you might once have considered boring, meditation, quiet reflection, genuine presence, start lighting up your brain in completely new ways. This creates what psychologists call value incongruence, a mismatch between your evolving internal compass and the external world's expectations of you. And here's the kicker, your brain interprets this mismatch as social rejection even when it's not. You literally feel lonely at a neurological level because you're operating on a different frequency than everyone around you. The result is that you become like someone who's learned to see color in a black and white world. But everyone else is still operating in grayscale. You're not losing your ability to connect, you're developing the ability to connect more authentically. But first you have to pass through this phase of feeling completely misunderstood. Here's exactly what that looked like in my own life. I've spent over 15 years as a software engineer, climbing traditional corporate ladders. But as I started doing inner work myself, meditation and reading spiritual texts, something strange happened. The output that I was producing began to lose meaning. Even as my work scaled up and contributed millions to company bottom lines, my mindset shifted away from what I call MJ mode, Michael Jordan leading his team to numerous championships, over to cycles of burnout with no apparent way out. Meanwhile, the things truly lighting me up, a meditation breakthrough, books on consciousness, genuine presence with my family, weren't things that I could easily share without getting confused looks from people. When colleagues complained about deadlines or celebrated promotions, I'd quietly think to myself, but does any of this really matter? Like I was watching a game that I no longer understood the rules to. That identity shift is inevitable on the spiritual path, and it's supposed to feel isolating. You're not broken, you're evolving. But if you think that identity shift is disorienting, wait until you hear about the psychological no man's land you have to navigate next. Developmental psychologists have identified a phenomena called liminality, the psychological space between who you were and who you're becoming. And here's what they've discovered. This transition period is actually more psychologically challenging than major life traumas like divorce or job loss. Why? Because at least with trauma, you may be dealing with crises, but you know who you are at the end of the day. But in liminality, your entire sense of identity becomes uncertain. You're no longer your old self, but you haven't yet become your new self. You're floating in a sort of psychological limbo. Anthropologists have studied this phenomena across cultures for centuries. In traditional societies, they created rituals, vision quests, initiations to help people navigate this treacherous in-between space. But in our modern world, we have no roadmap for spiritual transformation. You're expected to figure it out alone, which makes the loneliness even more acute. The dangerous part is that this is where most people give up on their spiritual journey. They can't handle the uncertainty, so they retreat back to their old identity, even if it no longer fits them. They choose the familiar discomfort in their old life over the unfamiliar discomfort of growth. I lived through this exact phase myself. December of last year, I was on a 2-week break from work, and for the first time in my career, I didn't have a clear next project. I'd always had someone else's goals to work towards before this, and suddenly I had to figure out what I wanted. For real, you know? I felt completely lost. I wasn't the achievement-driven engineer I'd been for over a decade at this point, but I also wasn't yet the spiritually grounded person that I was evolving into. I was just floating, neither here nor there. I'd go for walks with my dog in the mornings and look at people going about their normal lives, commuting, focused on their routines, seemingly certain about their path, and I felt like an alien. Not better or worse, just different, like I was in a parallel dimension where nothing was certain. That wilderness phase is where your spiritual muscles actually develop. But it's also where the loneliness becomes almost unbearable. Now, before I reveal what's amplifying this loneliness beneath the surface, let me give you a survival guide I wish I'd had for navigating this wilderness yourself. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to share could be the difference between thriving through this transition and getting stuck in it forever. Here's what changed everything for me. Learning to distinguish between two completely different types of spiritual loneliness. Most people think that all spiritual loneliness is the same, but neuroscientist Dr. Matthew Lieberman's research reveals that there are actually two distinct neural pathways involved. The first is what he calls social pain. Your brain's alarm system warning you about the potential rejection you're facing. This feels desperate and anxious, like you need to get back to the tribe immediately. The second is what researchers call solitude preference. Your brain creating space for introspection and growth. This feels peaceful, even generative. The problem? They can happen simultaneously, which is why spiritual loneliness often feels so confusing. You're experiencing both the growth-oriented need for space and the survival-oriented fear of rejection at the same time. But here's how you can tell them apart. Social pain feels like contraction. You're shrinking away from the world out of fear. Solitude preference feels like expansion. You're making space to grow. So when loneliness hits, ask yourself, does this feel like expansion or contraction? If it's expansion, honor it. Cancel the social plans, take that solo retreat. Trust that this solitude is serving your evolution. If it's contraction, that's your ego trying to sabotage your progress. That's when you need to gently push towards connection. But here's the practical part. Finding your spiritual community without abandoning your entire life. Start with what I call signal broadcasting. Authentically engaging with content and with communities that resonate with you and your growth. This is exactly what worked for me. I started reaching out to creators whose content had helped me. Not just great video, but sharing how their message had actually impacted my life in that moment. I sent genuine appreciation messages to authors and podcasters who'd shifted something in me. One interaction led to a meaningful exchange that reminded me that I wasn't alone on this path. It wasn't dramatic, just a simple back and forth that proved that there were others walking along the same path with me. Your tribe is out there, but they can't find you if you're hiding. Signal that you're ready to be found by engaging authentically with the content that speaks to your soul. Next, create what I call anchoring practices. Spiritual GPS systems for when you feel most lost. During my December break, I started asking myself one question every morning. What would my ideal day look like right now? Not 10 years from now, but today. The answer was always simpler than I expected. More space to think, more creativity, more presence with my family, less urgency, less performative pressure? That question became my North Star when loneliness made me doubt the path that I was on. Remember, spiritual loneliness is temporary and directional. You're not moving away from all connection entirely. You're moving towards deeper, more authentic relationships with yourself and others. The loneliness is making space for connections that actually nourish you instead of drain you. But here's what most people don't realize about what's really happening during this process. Neuroscientist Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett's research reveals something shocking. Your brain's primary job isn't to think or even feel, it's to keep you alive. And from your brain's perspective, social rejection equals death. This is why spiritual growth feels so threatening to your nervous system. When you start evolving spiritually, your ego, the part of your psyche responsible for your survival, interprets this as mortal danger. Why? Because spiritual growth threatens the very identity structures that have kept you safe your entire life. So your ego launches what psychologists call extinction rebellion, a last-ditch effort to pull you back to familiar territory. And loneliness is one of its most powerful weapons. Here's how the ego's sabotage actually works. It amplifies every moment of social awkwardness, every misunderstood conversation, every instance where you feel different. Then it whispers, "See, you're pushing everyone away. Maybe you should just go back to being normal. At least then you had friends." The ego weaponizes your growth against you by making authenticity feel like a path to total isolation. It convinces you that following your calling means losing your community. This happened to me when I started this YouTube channel, actually. After months and months of inner work, when I finally started making content about spirituality, the ego's voice got so loud. "Who are you to talk about this? You're just a software engineer." Real spiritual teachers have credentials, years in ashrams, thousands of followers. Then it pointed to the evidence. Low view counts, few comments, friends not sharing my content. See? Nobody cares. You're isolating yourself for nothing. Go back to safe content about productivity. But here's what I discovered. The ego's loneliness feels desperate. I need external validation to survive. The soul's solitude feels peaceful. I'm learning to be my own best company. One night, feeling particularly isolated, I tried something different. Instead of fighting the loneliness, I asked a question from the untethered soul. Who is feeling this emotion? This creates space between you and your emotions. And in that space, I realized something profound. The part observing the loneliness wasn't lonely at all. The witness, the deeper awareness, that part was completely at peace. The ego was lonely because it was losing control of my identity. But my true self wasn't lonely at all. It was finally coming home, actually. If you're feeling alone on your spiritual journey, you're not broken, you're not doing it wrong, and you are definitely not crazy. You're experiencing the natural growing pains of consciousness evolution. The loneliness is both real and temporary. Real because you're leaving familiar territory and familiar versions of yourself. Temporary because authentic spiritual growth inevitably leads to authentic community. Here's your action step. The next time spiritual loneliness hits, pause and ask yourself, who is feeling this loneliness? Create space between you and the emotion. Notice the part that you can observe without being consumed. That observer is never actually alone. It's connected to something infinitely larger. But when the ego gets loud and the path feels uncertain, there's an ancient secret that can anchor you in unshakable peace. It's a 2,500-year-old technique that's just as relevant today as it was under that Bodhi tree. I made a whole video about it that might be exactly what you need to hear next. You'll find it right here. Every person who's ever walked a spiritual path has felt this loneliness, so you are in good company, even when it doesn't feel that way. Thanks for watching.